The BBC is letting Gary Lineker 2.0 go unpunished. Nihal Arthanaika stands accused of breaching the BBC's impartiality guidelines and their social media code with relentlessly biased left-wing and offensive content. Now, you might remember Nihal. He's the guy who said that working in an overwhelmingly white workplace was bad for his mental health. That, I think, was racist. The BBC let him off. The BBC has clear social media guidelines about how staff should behave online. Treat others with respect even in the face of abuse. Do not use offensive or aggressive language and do conduct yourself with courtesy. Don't attack individuals, even when you disagree with their views. Don't criticise your colleagues in public. Respect the privacy of the workplace. Don't be drawn into ill-tempered exchanges. In fact, this was backed up by the BBC Director General yesterday, who said,
to be kind and caring in this and listen to people and be nice.
OK, so when he called the host of the Trigonometry podcast, Konstantin Kisin, a talentless grifter and goes after members of the public who disagree with his point of view, is he breaking those guidelines? The BBC guidelines for presenters were very clear. Our audiences should not be able to tell from BBC output the personal opinions of our journalists or news and current affairs presenters on matters of public policy, political or industrial controversy, or on controversial subjects in other areas. They may not express personal views on such matters publicly, including in any BBC-branded output or on personal blogs and social media. OK, well, Nihal appears to have taken a side in the Israel-Gaza conflict. Shock horror, that side does not appear to be Israel. He does seem too bothered about hiding his personal views on Brexit. Taking back control, he sarcastically tweeted. He's quite clever with his wording, but we all know what that means, don't we? Can someone please send me a link to a fact-based narrative on how the UK has benefited from Brexit? A counter to this piece, I cannot find one. Look, it's pretty obvious what he's getting at there, isn't it? He appears to be going into bat for the Labour Party. Next, throwing shade over Tory Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and Liz Truss. He said, bit rich, the Chancellor, saying that the leader of the opposition support for Jeremy Corbyn, when he was leader, would have crashed the economy, considering what former PM Liz Truss did. He seems obsessed with Lee Anderson, to the point where he retweeted Gary Lineker, poking fun at Lee, essentially saying that he'll lose his seat at the next election. Is that impartial? Maybe it is. There doesn't appear to be much of a focus on left-wing politicians, certainly not in his recent Twitter history. He just can't stop slamming GB News and our viewers and listeners, and he's even banging on about what must our annual GB News presenters' dinner look like. Well, Nihal, much better than this, mate. OK, there he is, having dinner with James O'Brien and Emily Maitlis. Siri, show me hell on earth. I'm sure he'd say, well, the company you keep doesn't necessarily define your political views, and the apparent anti-Brexit, anti-Tory, questionably abusive stuff he puts on social media doesn't bleed over into his actual on-air output. Well, today he had the hard-left so-called comedian Nish Kumar on his show. Apparently he introduced him by saying that his kids call him uncle. Well, there we go. I'm assuming that they get on rather well then, though, don't they? The same Nish Kumar that made such offensive comments about Brexit that he was booed off stage at a charity gig.
Now you want me to leave, but I'm not going to do it. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Anyway, it sounds to me like he was openly joking about his own political bias during today's broadcast.
Now, good news, bad news, Nish. Good news as a symbol of an evolving British society, one that is more accepting of people from ethnic minorities. There is an Asian Prime Minister. I think you know what the bad news is for you, personally, coming from where you come from. It just happens to be Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
So how did you deal with this good news, bad news moment in your life? I, of course, have no opinion on it, but in your life.
Yes, you, of course, remain resolutely impartial.
In all things.
In all things.
I mean, that sounds a lot like he might be mocking the impartiality guidelines, doesn't it? Does anyone get the impression that he thinks he's untouchable? Can I just repeat some of the BBC guidelines here? All right, so our audiences should not be able to tell from BBC output the personal opinions of our journalists or news and current affairs presenters on matters of public policy, political, industry or controversy, or on controversial subjects. Do not use offensive or aggressive language. Do conduct yourself with courtesy. Don't attack individuals even when you disagree with their views. Look, we know what his views are, don't we? It's obvious. And he has attacked individuals, hasn't he? I mean, look, we've gone to the BBC and Nihal personally, who I'm sure denies breaching any of the guidelines, and we are yet to hear back. Let's get the thoughts of my panel tonight. It is Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson. We have got the founding chairman of Global Britain UK, Aman Bagar, and former Labour Party advisor, it's Matthew Larzer. Alison, do you think that the BBC should be acting on people like this, or not so much?
Yeah, I think they should take him off air. I mean, listen to the way they were mocking the impartiality just then. I'm not sure if Nihal has twigged that a lot of white people pay the licence fee. They pay his salary. He's dripping with contempt for ordinary people. The way he refers to GB News viewers, GBBs, people really need to watch this series on Empire because obviously they're so thick and racist. He's throwing around insinuations that people are racist. Let me tell you something, Patrick. Not only is GB News a very diverse channel, as everybody watching will know, this channel has diversity of class, social class. The people on the BBC, of whom he's a part, they don't have diversity of social class, which is why contemptuous, condescending views like that are allowed on the air at the BBC and why the BBC is losing audience share by the week.
OK, I mean, among your views, when you see people, which I would argue, all right, maybe quite clever with the wording of some of his tweets and, you know, slapping the old question mark there every now and again. But, you know, actually, we know what his views are. And I think what he said about white people could well be deemed a bit racist.
Well, of course it is racist. I mean, you know, those words and those things are absolutely racist, no doubt about it. But then again, you know, people like Nihal, they have form for this. And the BBC continues to not just employ them, but bring in more people like that. I mean, look at, for example, the new BBC Verify service. Recently, we saw what? It was infested with ex-Al Jazeera people. I mean, that alone, I think, draws the whole thing into big question. But more so than that, let's not forget, the BBC brand itself is now so damaged. I mean, there was a time that the BBC brand around the world was so respected and literally taken as gospel in terms of news reporting. But you look around today, around the world, the BBC is no longer a trusted source. Something has to change. OK. Now, look, Nihal isn't here to defend himself. Like I said, we've gone to him for comment. We've gone to the BBC for comment. But, Matthew, you know, I look at that and I just think, well, how can someone get away with that on the BBC? You know, the taxpayers pay for this stuff. They expect impartiality. Is that impartial, really?
Well, I think on air, as you heard in the clip, he acknowledged that, you know, he may have been joking and maybe the joke wasn't very funny, but I think he's a good journalist. I think the tweets went too far. I think somebody needs to have a word with him about the tweets and tell him that he needs to abide by the guidelines. But I think that he's an interesting voice to have on the BBC. And I think I'm a big defender of the BBC. I mean, some missteps have been made, but I'm a big defender of the BBC's role. I think it's essential to our national character, and I think it's essential to our national prestige. And
do you think it's balanced in terms of social class, Matthew? Do you know how many of those presenters were privately educated?
No, I do actually. Yes, because I mean, I worked there for 14 years, and I went to a comprehensive, and I was one of the minority. Well, but they have made a difference. And actually, Nihal's show comes from Salford. I was part of a group that was about expanding the reach of people who joined. So it wasn't just Oxbridge. It wasn't just Oxbridge PPE graduates that entered the BBC. It was either if you entered the BBC or the Cabinet seemed to be where you ended up if you were an Oxbridge PPE graduate. Yes, the BBC. I mean, I remember being in BBC staff seminars where people would say about diversity and then the staff would put their hands up and say, what about class and background? So, yeah, I agree with you. It always needs to think about diversity in the broadest sense. But if we lose the BBC, we lose a huge part of the British character.
Look, I think it's fair to say, and a lot of viewers at home will agree, that a lot of BBC journalists are actually masquerading as journalists, are actually left-wing activists. Let's be honest. That's what they are. They're masquerading as journalists and reporters, pushing a certain agenda, and they're getting away with it. OK, fine. He's saying all this. Well, where's the BBC journalist saying the counter?
Well, I think
there isn't one.
Go on, Alison. I mean, just to honour that, he said, this is one of the things he said, I saw a lack of diversity in my workplace over a long period of time. It affected me and it was isolating and lonely. Yet all these GBB's-loving types made me to be an anti-white racist. If a single one of them think I'm going to be quiet, they are even more stupid. Now, obviously, he's got strong feelings about that. I mean, the BBC social media code, I think, says that you can't say things like that.
No, you can't. But look what happens as soon as they're let off the leash, like Emily Maitlis leaving. The minute they leave the BBC, we see the true colours coming out, don't we? We see that. But as I said, what comes through these tweets is, yes, I think he is. I think he is an anti-white racist, Matthew, and his contempt for ordinary people, contempt for people who are watching us now at home. That's really.
I think
not acceptable.
I don't think that's acceptable.
Imagine us saying that about a BBC view.
Not everybody at the BBC is a left-wing activist. Robbie Gibb, who was one of the first producers that I worked with when I joined the BBC, and who's now on the BBC Board of Governors, went to be, Theresa May's Director of Communications. So, although that you do need diversity of voices, and when I worked there, one of the good things they did is I worked on a purely political show to start with, and they recruited people from politics, and therefore they got a balance. They got people from Labour background, Tory background, and even the occasional Lib Dem.
Even the occasional Lib Dem. Look, now Nihal obviously would deny being an anti-white racist, as the allegation was there. We had previously offered for Nihal to come on the show. Clearly doesn't fancy it, so he's more than welcome any time. Aman, your views there about whether or not actually, the BBC should be taking action against these people. Is it kind of Gary Lineker 2.0, do you think?
I mean, look, I think it's fair to say we know the BBC is not going to take any action. It really hasn't done anything serious with what Gary Lineker has been doing over, so many years now.
It did with Carol Vorderman.
Well, I mean, look, I think it is up to the British people to start taking action. Defund the BBC.
Oh, that's my pension.
Defund the BBC. Stop paying the TV licence tax. And for goodness sakes, criminalising tens of thousands of women, sending them to jail for what? For not paying the salaries of Nihal.
I will just point out that it's you cannot. I think I'm right in saying you cannot be sent to prison for not paying the licence fee. But
historically,
there is a fine
you could.
There we go. Yeah. So it's important to get that clarification out there.
Yeah.